I got into this from being a very sick individual. I was born into a very violent household, a white bread society household, and that's where we ate lots of white bread and cereals and potato chips and soda pops and stuff like that. And this was, soda pops were just coming into style, in the 40s and 50s. And I was born 18 months after my older brother, one of my older brothers, and he never forgave me for taking the attention away from Mom, just like that, at 18 months old. So he pushed me on anything that was rusty. That's what I fell on. He made sure of it. So I was getting tetanus shots every 6 months, even though that they thought at the time tetanus shots would last a year. Now they say they last, 2 to 5 years. But at that time, they were giving me, every 3 to 6 months, they were giving me a tetanus shot because I was always injuring myself on rusty instruments. And at the 18 months old, the tetanus shot I got there went to my brain. And it gave me autism. So I was unable to communicate from that point on. I could not understand language at all. It was 8 years old before I was able to understand that I could parrot. I'd listen to sound bites and I would throw them back. I would hear a sound, a sound or a phrase that sounded similar to something I'd heard, and I'd repeat something. So I was throwing back inane phrases, absurd, incongruous phrases to questions that were asked to me or statements that were given to me because I wanted to blend in, I wanted to be normal. But it was going to be impossible because I couldn't understand what I was saying. So that was very difficult because then people were thought that I was insulting them, making fun of them. They thought maybe I was just like a James Dean character, a wise guy, because I didn't look autistic. I didn't have that stare because my parents didn't let me stare. If I stared, they hit me, just like that, smack me with their hand, back of their hand or something like that, or got the belt out. So they would not let me stare. My mother was a nurse, my father was a scientist and an inventor, so he was not about to have an idiot in the family, but they did, and there was no way around it. So that's how I lived. In schools the same way. I was raised in a Catholic grade school and high school, and they were pretty rough. I don't think I'd known anybody more violent than the nuns and the priests. I got expelled on my first day of my sophomore year in high school, so that was perfect because then I went to a public school and they were a little bit more aware in that realm. So that was a little bit better. By the time I reached 12 years old, I had had so many vaccines and contaminated my body so much that I developed peritonitis. It was misdiagnosed as an appendicitis. And they got in there, found the appendix okay, but they took it out anyway because they didn't want to cause me trouble in the future. And that's the way the medical profession thinks, which is a sad thing. They don't realize the appendix is a library. It registers every foreign object that ever enters your body and the chemistry on how to handle it. Every disease that you've ever had, it's your library. So if they remove that, that means that every time a substance comes into your body has to reevaluate it. And that can take anywhere from 24 to 48 hours. If you have an appendix, just like that, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you're already dealing with the chemistry of that element that comes into the body. Of course, with all the new chemicals we have in our society, in industrial society, it isn't as easy because there are new elements, so the body is always registering these new elements, whether it's a pesticide in your food or a preservative or a coloring, a food additive, whatever it is, a flavoring, aspartame, any of those. Your body is always trying to rebalance itself and to adjust. And all those will be registered in the appendix. Some people's appendixes are very weak. So what happens is they burst. Now, the burst appendix were very rare before 1945, before canned foods came into heavy being. And that's when appendixes started gradually bursting because of all the contamination and the pancreas trying to register all of it. So they took my appendix at 12 years old, and they were injecting me every 2 to 4 hours with several injections. So by the time I got out, I was very debilitated. I was chronically fatigued all the way from about 8 years old when I started receiving a lot of the vaccines. At 15 and a half years old, right after my third polio vaccine, I started having angina pectoris. That's for old people, right? Heart attacks. I was having a heart attack about 5 a week. Some of them would cause me to black out, the pain was so bad. My whole arm would hurt all the way down. I'd pass out, fall off my desk, lie on the floor in the aisle, and they just let me be. Because the doctors told them it was all in my head. All in my head. I've got heart attacks, and it's all in my head. Because all they look for is congenital malformations or congestion. So if they don't find a congested heart or arteries, they look at it as if there's no problem. They don't realize that mercury and formaldehyde and aluminum and detergents that are in vaccines go to other tissues in the body. See, they won't register that because if they do, you can sue them. So they will never admit it. So it went into my heart just like the one at 18 months old went to my brain and damaged it. This went to my heart. So I had over 300 heart attacks by the time I was 22 years old when I changed my diet heavily. I had 50 of them put me unconscious. I didn't die with any of them, but they were pretty painful, very, very painful. Also, I developed diabetes, juvenile diabetes at 15 and a half, and started to take insulin. And they said that was incurable and that I would never have a well pancreas the rest of my life, and I would always have to take insulin. So by the time I was 16, I met a girl who liked me. I was 15 and a half actually when I met her, who liked me a lot. And still, you know, I mean, she had to communicate on a psychic level because I was still an idiot. And I still couldn't communicate. The way I got through schools was I always picked the smartest, most sensitive girl to sit next to in every class. And I copied her hieroglyphs because I couldn't identify, except for patterns, you know, words. To me, they were just abstract lines. So I copied those abstract lines down. I mean, I could do her own handwriting style, everything. So I got caught a few times doing that because they thought it was somebody else's paper, their paper, not mine, they were doing. So I realized that I had to alter these objects that I was writing, these hieroglyphs. So it was a very complicated way to grow up. It was very difficult. I was always a loner. Nobody wanted to play with me or be with me because they thought I was an idiot or a wise guy. I was always saying things that would insult them, and I didn't know what I was saying. So by the time I was 16, when this girl came into my life, I thought, wow, this is pretty great. This is incredible. So we got married. I was 16 years old, had a child the first day of my, the first week of my senior year in high school. And then I had to work and take care of a baby and, you know, live life that way. So my wife and I didn't have any communication because she was at work. When I would go to school in the mornings, come home, take care of the baby. She would come home from work. I would go to work, get home, take care of the baby all night. He cried. He had colic for almost a year and just cried almost 24 hours a day. So it was very difficult. I became an alcoholic. I started smoking when I was about 8 years old. I was smoking about 2 packs of Lucky Strike non-filter at that time. And let me tell you, I loved it. If smoking weren't bad for me, I would still be smoking because I loved smoking. My mother used to hate it because I would, you know, till that whole end of that was flaming hot. And she'd say, "Stop that, you look like a fiend." I said, Mom, you look like a fiend when you do that. Yeah, so, of course, I didn't know what that meant. I just knew she didn't like me doing that, but who cared, you know, so I continued smoking and I was drinking. The fatigue was very, very bad, so I had to drink 11 cups of coffee a day and smoke cigarettes to get me through the day. And then to relax at night, I had to have at least a fifth of some kind of hard liquor. Bourbon, then I went to gin, and you say drinking gin's a sin. And it was just destroying my body. So, you know, the marriage didn't work out, of course. I was an idiot. I mimicked the males in my family, and I have 4 brothers, and they were all chauvinist pigs. And so I was a chauvinist pig, too. So I mistreated my wife. I mean, I didn't beat her or anything, but I certainly mistreated her, ignored her, and, you know, if I didn't get my way, you know, I did my tantrums as I saw my father do. So that's the way to destroy a marriage. So, of course, I destroyed the marriage and went off to California, to the promised land. And it was better, it was warmer, you know, because in Cincinnati, Ohio, where I was at that time, you know, the temperature would just make me very fatigued. My father would turn off the heat at night completely, and wake up in the morning, it'd be probably 30 degrees in the house. And I would head right for the heater, the wall heater, just to get warm enough to heat my clothes up so I could put them on and then get up and go. So moving out to California was a nice thing for me. Of course, I continued, you know, the same old stuff, drinking and smoking and drinking my coffee and alcohol. I had a talent like all autistic children. I think probably most autistic children. I was an idiot savant in one way. Somebody could give me a computer program, and I could write it in about an hour or 2 hours. It would take them a month to a year to write. It was like, I didn't know how I did it. I just did it. In school, it was the same way with math. They'd give me a problem, had the answer just like that. So they always thought, the only place I didn't cheat, they always caught me for cheating because I, you know, didn't put the resolution down. You know, if it were a, you know, a division problem, I didn't put it down, you know, the way you do and structure it all out. I just put down the answer, and it was always right. So my mother put me in a technical school that had just opened for computer programming. And she took me there just to see if anything could happen. And it was interesting because they didn't give the normal test. There was nothing about comprehension with language. It was all math and geometry and physics. So I got excellent grades in it. Everything was just perfect. So the professors there realized that I had a autistic problem, and they were going to use me. So they put me in with the third largest trucking company in the world to do systems analysis for them, and Time DC, that was the trucking company, Carte Blanche Corporation. And so I was making a lot of money as being an idiot. You know, it was pretty nice. So I had a little house in Beverly Hills, and but continuing, I had to have my cigarettes and coffee to get me going because I was fatigued all the time, and my alcohol to put me to sleep at night. What do you think happened? Started spitting blood, and I mean projectile spitting blood. So I went to the doctor, and they said, "Oh, you have an ulcer, and you know, here, take Maalox. Take as much as you like." And this is just chalk, watered down chalk. So I was drinking that, and of course, wasn't digesting anything because it did take off all the hydrochloric acid. So then I was breaking out. First time I had acne in my life. I mean, that was the only illness I never had. I had everything else in the sun, under the sun, every disease you can imagine, but acne. But after taking this Maalox, I started having acne. And then 6 months later, a tumor developed right next to the ulcer. So they said, well, we have to cut that out. We're going to give you a vagotomy pyloroplasty. Now, you understand I'm still autistic, so you just do whatever the doctor says. So, of course, I let them go in and cut into my stomach and take out the tumor. And they severed all the vagus nerves to my stomach, so I would never, ever again secrete hydrochloric acid. They put me in the class of octogenarians who do not digest food at all because they have no hydrochloric acid. Everything I ate after that, if I ate meat, it came out in big pustulations, anywhere from my forehead all the way down to my knees. I'd be just covered with those within 24 hours of eating cooked meat. So that really whittled it down because I was a big meat eater. I loved eating meat. Cooked, of course. I had everything well done. My mother didn't know how to cook, so everything was burned. Nothing was seasoned. I didn't know what seasoning was. And my father always forced salt on us. You know, he was one of those big believers in salt, so everything got salted. He wondered why he had migraines all of his life. Migraine headaches because of all the salt that he had. But that's what he did. And that's how I ate. Then the incision turned tumorous. It got up to 1.5 inches wide and 3/4 of an inch high. It was a pretty big tumor. So they said, okay, we have to irradiate that, stop it from growing. So I had 10 weeks of intense radiation therapy. Has everybody done pottery here? Know what happens when you take nice soft clay, malleable clay, alive clay, and you fire it? It's dead stone, hard as can be, depending upon the cone heat level that you take it. If you take it up to a very high level, like 1,700, 2,300 degrees, you can end up with glass, depending upon the type of clay that you're using. So that's what they did to my spine. They cauterized my spine with that intense radiation therapy. So my movement was like this, and painful. If I wanted to sit in a chair, it would take 3 to 5 minutes to get in that chair and sit. I was pretty much crippled after that. So then the radiation therapy not only cauterized my spine and made me fairly crippled and in pain all the time, it also gave me blood and bone cancer, typical of radiation. So I got blood and bone cancer. So it's even more fatigued, no energy at all. So they decided they were going to give me chemotherapy, so I went through 3 months of chemotherapy right here at UCLA. And they left me bald, completely crippled. I was crawling on my elbows like a worm. Lived for almost 2.5 years that way, crawling on the floor like a worm. It would take me 30 minutes to go from my living room to the kitchen, which was about from here back to the end of the rows there. 30 minutes to get that far. I was so fatigued and so crippled and very painful. And I couldn't sleep. I'd sleep 10 minutes at a time, 12 minutes maximum. We'll wake up in excruciating pain. So they said because of the radiation therapy, because of the blood and bone cancer, the chemotherapy, I took it, stopped it after 3 months. They said you're going to die anyway. They wanted me to go into a hospice, and I said, no hospice, no going away from my home. I was still autistic. I knew that people would be offended or ridiculed if I threw back a sentence that was wrong. 2 volunteers from the hospice agreed to come 2 to 3 times a week, shop for my food, feed me, clean the house, make food for me for a few days, and then leave. And they were very wonderful. One of them was just an 18-year-old African-American boy that was about 6'2", and he belonged to the Going thing, which at the time was a group of singers hired by the Ford Motor Company to go around singing the Going thing, and they were in their Mach 1, Mustangs. And this kid was a volunteer.
And this kid brought me carrot juice and raw milk.
Only carrots I'd ever had were cooked, and every time I ate a cooked vegetable, I'd projectile vomit. So my parents forced me to sit at the table for 45 minutes to 2 hours after dinner, after everybody else left, because if I vomited anything, they would put that much more back on my plate and I had to eat it. So I had to learn how to cut my sense of taste off and my sense of vomit and repulsion off and swallow and get it down and hold it. So it was a very difficult thing to do. So here I was in a situation where I was vomiting a lot, and carrot juice, he was offering me the carrot juice, and I was saying, I don't think so. Finally, he coaxed me into drinking it. It was the best thing I'd ever tasted in probably a year since my stomach surgery. So I started drinking it, and then 10 days later, my autism popped off, just like a light switch. I thought, oh, verb, adverb, adjective, conjunction, all of this stuff. All of a sudden I understood everything and I started communicating. So I called my uncle, who was matriculating for his doctorate in psychology here at UCLA, and started having a conversation with him. And he said, "This Aajonus? Aajonus?" You know. And I said, "Yeah, isn't this great?" And he says, "Well," I said, "what I want to do is get a lot of books on nutrition. Do you know anything about that?" He said, "Well, I don't believe in nutrition and all that. You know, it's more of what's in your mind." Of course, he was a psychologist. You know, so well, what else is he going to say and believe? So I called Steve, the young African American who had got me into the carrot juice, and I said, "Listen, I spent all my money on I don't have anything left. I'm about to lose the house, and I want to buy a lot of books." And he said, "Sure, I'll loan you, you know." So he loaned me $110, and $110 in 1969 was a lot of books, because, you know, paperbacks were like 75 cents, 95 cents max for a big, thick book. And then hardbacks were anywhere from $1.25 to $2. So I got a lot of books on nutrition, and, you know, some of them were, you know, mind over matter stuff, you know. So I went through all those, and everything contradicted everything else. These people said, "Eat this." These people, "No, don't eat that because this will happen." So completely confused about what to do. So all I could do was just experiment and try different foods. So that's what I did. I tried different foods. Every time I ate something raw, it was easy, much easier. Didn't have much trouble with indigestion. Even with my situation and all my poisons that I had in the body, I could still do it. Every time I ate, of course, I'd have to go right to sleep, no matter if it was cooked or raw. But I had no energy, not enough nutrients in my body to be able to sustain anything else but digesting. That means I had to go to sleep for about an hour to an hour and a half after eating. And that was fine because I was always in pain. My bones were just aching. The only way I could stay out of pain was to get in a bathtub. I had a clawfoot, you know, tub, so it was pretty deep and pretty long, so I could fill it to the top, immerse myself in there, just my head sticking out, and put, you know, some Epsom salts in there and some raw milk, and it would cause me to be slightly buoyant, so I could sleep without any pain. If I slept anywhere else, 10, 12 minutes, 7 minutes, I was up in excruciating pain. Have to move over, let that pain subside, and then I go to sleep for a few minutes and I wake with pain again. In the bathtub, I would have almost had literally no pain, or pain that was easy to sleep through. And I wake up in an hour and a half, 2 hours, freezing to death because the water got so cold. So I just let some of the water out, heat it again, really high temperature, and then go to sleep again. So I could sleep 10, 12 hours like that. So that's when I finally started getting a little bit healthier and well quicker. So I got a nutritionist who taught me a lot about nutritionists. He tutored me for 3.5 years. Even though I was no longer autistic, I still had learning disabilities because I never learned to learn as everybody else did. So this tutor was very good. He was mainly into raw foods. He was about a 75% raw fooder. at times, he said, some of it's mind over matter, so I attempted to do the mind over matter stuff and went back to my RC Cola and donuts, powdered donuts that I loved, and, and all this kind of garbage. And of course, within a week, 10 days, I'd be back into autism. So on the third time that happened, I said, listen, I may have been an idiot, but I'm not stupid. So, food has something to do with your health. It's chemistry in itself. So I adhered to some kind of nutritional program. And I got more and more into raw, but it was moving into vegetarianism. I went from a raw lacto-ovo vegetarian where I was eating raw eggs and dairy, got very healthy and compared to where I was, very healthy and strong. I mean, I didn't have to crawl on the floor so much. I mean, I could crawl on my knees and hands like a baby, and I had to learn all over how to walk and run and do all of that. So I was getting healthier, and I felt a lot better. And then when I hit 27 years old, I thought, I'm not going to learn what I need to learn to recover from where I've been, from all the medical therapy, because that did the most damage. I thought, I'm going to have to go out and live out in the wild. I'm going to find tribes to live with. I'm going to live with animals and see what it is that makes all of them healthy and they don't have disease in the wild. So unless man encroaches upon their territory, pollutes it in some way, or robs them of their food. So I went on a bicycle with 4 saddlebags of biochemistry, physiology, anatomy, all these books, and my little dog on the back, little Lhasa Hungarian Puli, and she traveled with me. So we bicycled all over the place. She ran off with the coyotes one night. Actually went to live with the coyotes. She was a raw fooder, so she had no trouble. And if she was a female, so they didn't kill her. She went with them. And this was while we were in Yuma. So I traveled with my bicycle all the way across the United States and all areas of the United States 5 times, went all the way down to the Yucatan and all the way up to Alaska in a 2.5-year period. Sometimes I was pretty fatigued, so I'd throw my bicycle on a freight car, bungee cord it to the freight car, and just hang my hammock along the open doors, and just watch the scenery go by. Sometimes some border patrol, if I was going down into Mexico or getting next to the Mexican border, the border patrol or the railroad dicks, they called them, were there. And at that time, I was bearded, long-haired, and I wore robes, I knew that if I were a hippie, that if I wore robes, they would at least have a religious feeling and they wouldn't hurt me so badly, especially in Mexico. So, they jump up on the freight car and see me dressed like that, look at their gun and look at me and, like some vision with a bicycle and a hammock in this freight car, and say, stay out of sight. And they leave me alone. But I watched them beat and roll people pretty badly, put them in the hospital. So they were pretty good to me. And I slept in graveyards most of the time. Nobody bothers you in a graveyard, especially when you look like JC. So, so that's mostly where I spent my nights sleeping. Not even the police would bother me there. So I traveled like that, and I lived with the Yaqui Indians in northern Mexico, with the Mayan Indians in the Yucatan, the Sioux in the Dakotas, and the Inuit in Alaska. And all of them told me, the only way you're going to get well is to eat raw meat. Remember what happened to me when I eat raw meat? Pustulations all over the place, head to toe. Big, gooey, ugly pustulations. So there was no way I was going to eat meat. I just couldn't cross that line with meat. Raw, everything else raw, yes, that worked. Meat, no. I just had a wall there. It was not going to happen. I was not going to eat raw meat. So after 2.5 years, I was with the Eskimos. At the end of that 2.5 years, it was in early September. And they have a little celebration every year about that time. And they dug the stuff out of the ground, and they unwrapped it. It was in these hides, and they unwrapped it. And there was this green, black, and and purple and red and all these molds that were all over this stuff. So I thought it was some kind of an herbal mixture and was breaking down like you see molding leaves, you know, in a compost pile. And they said, no, it was raw meat. And I said, no, raw meat gets worms and it disappears. You know, that's what happens to raw meat, or it turns into jerky. I had no idea what happened to meat, you know, that you could get it to mold, it would break down. Of course, gangrene is a mold, but I didn't realize that. Even in all the stuff that I read, I just never put those two together. So they got me to eat a piece of this. They said it was a medicine and it would help me. So I had about a golf ball size amount of this stuff. Now it was really nasty. They first dug it out about 5 days before this celebration, and it didn't stink a half-mile downwind, so they reburied it. I mean, the odor was so bad that I almost projectile vomited when I got within 5 feet of the smell. It was that bad. So, you know, they had to get some cotton balls with musk oil, stuff it up my nose so I could get near it to eat it. Because I saw the children smelled it and they were jumping up and down, happy as like it was cotton candy or something, you know. And the adults were all smiling and happy, you know, and I'm saying, oh my God, this, I mean, beer was hard enough for me to take, you know, to get used to acquire a taste for this. I don't think I'll ever acquire a taste for this. But an unusual thing happened. When I had it, it calmed my blood and bone cancer was coming back pretty heavily because I had stopped eating raw dairy and raw eggs for about almost 4 years at this point. So I was breaking down again, slowly, gradually, all that I had built up and resurrected. So I thought, you know, I'm going to die. I haven't found the answers. But when I ate that stuff, that night, instead of waiting 2 hours the next morning for the sun to beat on my sleeping bag before I could move without pain, I actually had to heat my sleeping bag and me up in it to get up to a certain temperature before I could move without too much pain, bearable pain. It was only 45 minutes after I had that little golf ball size of this rotten meat that I still didn't know was meat, this moldy, stinky, foul stuff. So I said, So I went back, kept pestering for this herbal formula. They said, no, it's raw meat. It's just aged raw meat, you know. So I didn't believe them. Still didn't know the meat had that, would do that when it was buried like that. So I decided to go back, you know, to die. I was going to fast myself to death in a California desert where it was warm. So I was too weak at that point and too sore. So I hopped on a freight train, bungee corded my bike to the side, and took a trip all the way from Alaska. Different trains, of course, I had to hop. Sometimes I bicycled, and sometimes I hitchhiked. And all the way down to California, just below Palm Springs. And I picked an old Indian burial ground to die in. So I started fasting myself to death, and then these coyotes would come down every night, wake me up at midnight. They had a thing about midnight. So they would wake me up, and they sound like a bunch of crazy people, howling and screaming, and wake me up, and they'd play this game, and I realized finally the game was, I had to get a sense of where they were. So it took about almost 2 weeks. So then they hunted and brought me a jackrabbit. Jackrabbit was about a year old, so it was about 7.5 pounds. The ears were about this high. So now, you know, I hadn't eaten meat in 6.5 years at this point. And they're offering me this rabbit. And they've got it ripped open here, and it's bleeding and warm all over my feet. And I thought, well, one of the reasons I became a diehard evangelistic vegetarian was because I didn't want to hurt animals. So here the Easter bunny was on my feet, bleeding, warm. So I had all this compassion and anxiety. Here I was a vegetarian, and here I was thinking about eating this. All of a sudden, this whole sound bite came back of when my uncle was telling my brothers and cousins when they were going hunting, they were going rabbit hunting, that if they caught a wild rabbit, they shot a wild rabbit, They had to cook it thoroughly till it was well done and burned, because they have microorganisms in them that will take over in their intestines, be extremely painful for 48 hours, and will kill you. So that played back, and I understood it, every word of it. I thought, oh, the coyotes want me to help me die quickly. So they know that they'd become my friends, and if I fast to death, it could be 45, 60 days before I die, and it's going to be miserable. I was already at 2 weeks, and it was pretty miserable. So picked up this rabbit and started pulling, grinding, and, you know, kept coming back up. So I thought of myself back at home. My parents were there over me. Eat those vegetables. Eat those vegetables. So I went back to that place, and I said, okay, I'm going to psych myself into this, cut off my taste buds, everything, and get this down. So I did it. It took about 5 minutes to do that, and then I started eating it, and I was able to eat it. And after about 15 bites, it became tasty. So I ate 3.5 pounds about of that animal. And then the coyotes shared the rest. So I was hiking back to my campsite, and I knew I was dying because I felt good. The only times that I had felt good in my life was in my near-death experiences, twice on the operating table when they had to revive me from dead, and once when I was on a recreational drug trip where I died. So, and I left the body, and I remember leaving the body, and there was no pain. And that's what I felt when I was walking back to my campsite after eating this rabbit. So I knew I knew I was dying. Without question, I knew I was dying. I felt good. So went back to the campsite, went to sleep, woke up the next morning, and guess what? I was still in my sleeping bag. There was no white light, there was no tunnel, no nothing. I was still in the body. However, just like with the Eskimos, and this was like 3 months later, just like the Eskimos eating that rotten meat, I only had to wait 45 minutes to get out of the sleeping bag. Not 2 hours, again, with the sun beating on the sleeping bag. So I thought, well, I've still got 48 hours to go, or 40 hours to go, before the microbes take over my intestines and kill me. So I just drank water in that time, and you know, meditated a lot, and waited and waited and waited. No cramping, no diarrhea, no vomiting, no nothing. 3 days go by, and I say, it has to be the meat, the raw meat. Just like all 4 Indian tribes told me, raw meat is what I needed. So I ate this raw meat, this wild rabbit that's supposed to be infested with all this garbage and was supposed to kill me. Didn't do a thing but make me feel better. It made me strong. So I thought, okay, I'm going to start eating animals. So what happens? Well, sidewinders started passing me by right at that moment. So, and I'd seen Indians, you know, I'd seen the Indians just walk up and put their foot on the head, pick it up in front of the rattler, spin it around, snap the head off. I didn't think a thing. It just automatically, instinctively, I just went up and put my foot, bare foot on the head, picked it up in front of the rattler, whipped it around. I said, oh, shit. I've never done this before. What if he bites me? You know, so I started getting more paranoid, spinning this thing around. My arms started getting sore and sore, so I thought, okay, he's going to get me or I'm going to get him. Snapped, the head came right off. Peeled it back and ate it. Does not taste like chicken. Raw, it tastes like fish. Lots of bones. Tremendous amount of bones. So I started eating, I started trapping chipmunks and birds and eating eggs, and it's not enough food in the desert. I mean, I ate tarantulas. You know, I'd pop and the scorpions, I'd pop the poison sac off and eat them, because I knew I had lived with a girl who was from Peru, and she ate insects and stuff all the time. So I started eating all that stuff, but there just wasn't enough food. So I went down and made deals with all the surrounding farmers for dairy. I'd milk their cows or their goats and shovel manure for them. I'd do anything in exchange for all this food. So in 2.5 months, I gained about 50 pounds. And I looked like a scaled down Arnold Schwarzenegger. So I went back to Los Angeles to spread the word. raw meat, raw meat. And they said, are you out of your mind? You're going to get a brain fluke. A parasite's going to eat your brain up and you'll be an idiot. I said, I've been there and done that. This makes me feel good. This is the only thing that really is making me feel strong and not fatigued all the time. So I'm going to continue eating it. So for years, about 2.5 years, I ate it about 3 days a week, one time a day, 3 days a week. And I continued eating this meat, whatever it was. I ate raw chicken, raw fish, even lobsters. I just suck them out, raw, and beef, goat, whatever I could get, lamb. But just 3 days a week, one time a day. And I ate a poison mushroom, and it put me just back. They gave me blood cancer 3 times worse than I had had before. So then after that, shortly after, about a year after that, I started eating meat twice a day. Now then I started thinking, oh, I'm really weak, I'm really debilitated. What if this meat gives me parasites? They're going to go in my brain, I'll have autism, and I'll be sick at the same time. All this paranoia came on me. Being sick does that. So I went 13 years eating meat, raw meat of all sorts, even pinworm-infested meat. One time I had gotten a piece of salmon. I'd gone off of a fast and I was so hungry, and it was Sunday morning, and nothing was open. Nothing was open. So I was just starving, famished. I was getting a headache. It was so bad. So I went into a garbage can behind a fish market, and sure enough, they had fish in there. So I was eating it away, and when I got home with the rest of it, I opened it, and all these pinworms were just undulating everywhere. Just white and long, all through this thing. So I must have eaten a couple thousand, in that part that I eat. And then because it didn't bother me, I eat the rest of it because I was still hungry before anything opened. And I had my feces and blood checked for 10 weeks. Not one parasite. Not one parasite lived in my body. So after 13 years of eating raw meat and never getting a fluke or a parasite from it, I realized that the medical profession was again full of it. So I decided to go see these tests, these experiments they had done at the universities. So of course I was here in LA, started off at UCLA, went to Duke, Yale, Harvard, and Stanford. Not one of them had done any test to prove that animals got parasites from raw meat. It was all an imagination. It was all hypothesis that stretched into this law that was written in stone. And it had no scientific backing whatsoever. So here I went 13 years, 9 of those 13 years worrying about whether I was going to get a brain fluke or something. Never happened. So it was all bull. So anything the medical profession tells you, forget it. When it comes to diet, health, they know absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. They know disease and drugs, chemicals. That's what they're taught. And it's not the doctor's fault. The pharmaceutical industry took over the medical profession when Rockefeller and Carnegie started funding all of this research to find chemicals from the foods that did things, to isolate those ingredients that were active, and to sell them as drugs. That is when the pharmaceutical industry took over the medical profession. And do you know that all the procedure manuals are written by the pharmaceutical industries? Want to know about health? Do not go to a doctor. Eat right.